Pembroke is a graceful pyramidal peak situated on the border of both Tibet and Nepal. As a summit, it reaches an elevation of 7,161 meters. It is common to refer to Pumori as Everest's daughter. Over the Khumbu Valley, it casts a lengthy shadow. Technically demanding and aesthetically stunning, Pumori stands at 7,050 meters. Climbers seldom choose it due to its steep launchpad slopes and tragic history. Just 8 kilometers to the west of Mount Everest lies Pumori. From there, you can get a once-in-a-lifetime glimpse of Everest, Lhasa, and Nuptsa. The conventional route of Pumori, which follows the southeast ridge, typically requires 3 camps. The initial portion allows access to the base camp, but a barrier with ice cliffs approximately 6,000 meters high hinders it. Avalanches caused by falling ice are most frequently generated near 6,200 meters in elevation, making the area a particularly dangerous part of Pumori. Tragedies and fatalities have long been linked to the mountain. Spanish climbers, in particular, have suffered here. In the autumn of 2001, 10 mountaineers attempted to summit Mount Pumori. They were a group of youthful adventurers making their first trip to the Himalayas. Although the visitors to Nepal were experienced with mountain ranges, they had originally planned to climb Annapurna, Makalu, and Amadablam, which are 3 of the world's most famous peaks. However, they ultimately chose Pumori. Everything they wanted was there. It was an aesthetically pleasing summit, dangerous in its own right, and boasted an alluring height of over 7,000 meters. It was ideal for a quick ascent. Before attempting Pumori, the expedition ascended Island Peak to acclimate, since several members had a month off beforehand. Among the climbers, Bonanno Areta was an experienced mountaineer. All of his companions were in their early 20s. A few had climbed mountains before. They planned to leap to the peaks of the Himalayas after meeting in the Andes the year before. Early October saw the erection of tents at base camp. Everyone celebrated Ben's and Bonanno's birthdays on October 11th. They established Camp 1 at an elevation of approximately 6,200 meters above sea level after preparing a material cache at 5,700 meters. After Shere Ol suffered severe altitude sickness, Bonanno suggested he descend to Ferrake instead, accompanying him on the way down. Before leaving, Minu informed the young mountaineers that Pumori had caused some worry for her due to concerns about their safety. While at base camp in 1991, she had witnessed an avalanche drag down a young Frenchman from a Sherpa team on the Pumori slopes. More than anything else, however, the young climber's initiative propelled the journey forward. Despite Bonanno's reservations, he agreed to join the youths because they were the driving force behind the expedition. Between Camps 1 and 2, the climbers knew they faced the most treacherous part of Pumori. A climber named Asana Abbas had warned them against making repeated crossings of that perilous section after her climb of Pumori in 1991. She advised that one should only cross it while ascending to the peak or early in the morning, when the cold has frozen the top layer of snow and ice. Upon reviewing the ascent attempt, the group decided to plan 2 separate routes. Ascending the peak was everyone's top priority. On October 16th, Ben, Aro, Inaka, and another Aro departed from base camp. The large number of participants in the expedition led to the decision to send 2 separate parties to attempt reaching the peak. They reached Camp 1 on the very same day. They left around midnight on October 17th to summit that day. They had to traverse the avalanche-prone area first thing in the morning, as the ice blocks on the southeast wall would have solidified overnight in the cold. After waiting their turn, the 5 teenage mountaineers climbed northeast past Pumori and crossed a narrow ravine, dividing the 2 sides at 6,600 meters. From that point on, the path appeared considerably safer. Once they reached that point, their plan was to use the radio to communicate with base camp, but the next morning brought nothing positive. No updates came from the 5 youthful climbers at any time of day, not at sunrise, noon, or even at the sunset rainbow. You have to picture the 5 cautiously cutting through the night, the dry crack of ice axes and crampons biting into frozen snow. Already scanning the horizon for the mountain range that would reveal the path to the peak, they must have been filled with anticipation, eager to uncover their ignorance and satisfy their curiosity. Then, out of nowhere, there was nothing but a faint warmth, isolated thunder without a storm, and a rumbling that grew louder and louder. First came confusion, then a haze of fragmented nighttime memories. Next, a brief period of disorientation, followed by a futile struggle against the overwhelming force, and finally, nothing. Total silence. The young mountaineers were swept down the face by a huge avalanche. At an altitude of about 6,200 meters above sea level, the party had set up camp when an avalanche struck just 50 meters above them. The avalanche dragged them approximately 800 meters down the slope. Avalanches on this mountainside have tragically claimed lives on multiple occasions. All 5 casualties were young adults, perfect in every aspect and without any personal fault. Avalanches are rare in the morning, especially when this disaster occurred, but occasionally the mountain delivers unexpected and uncontrollable shocks and surprises. When word of the delay reached Yonor Rola, Hushmariu, and Shir Ora, they were understandably worried. All day long they listened on their walkie-talkies, hoping to hear a response, but all they received was deafening silence. It seemed as if Pumori itself was yawning and enraged at daybreak, just like the 5 young climbers. At base camp, the 3 young men were restless. When the tension became overwhelming, they requested a reconnaissance helicopter from the organization that had planned the expedition. At dawn on October 18th, the agency dispatched a helicopter to Pumori. It touched down at Gorak Shep to collect Yonor Rola. The pilot quickly spotted 2 sleeping bags among the rubble left by the avalanche earlier that morning. Meanwhile, after completing their expedition to Fariche, Banano Ereta and Shabir Ard returned to the base camp. They stayed in the village for 3 days until Shir Ora recovered from altitude sickness. Knowing that today was the summit attempt, they returned to the mountain's base. Suddenly, they heard the sound of a helicopter overhead. In the Himalayas, seeing a helicopter often signals serious trouble. They quickened their pace as soon as they spotted it. A growing knot of fear tightened their throats as they heard the sounds of other hikers and climbers descending from Gorak Shep. At base camp, they learned the 5 young climbers had gone missing since the previous morning. It seemed unbelievable to Manano. It was imperative for him to witness the situation firsthand. His gut feeling and years of experience led him to believe that the 5 mountaineers had been crushed by an avalanche. Based on his observations of the mountain, he anticipated that the bodies might have been carried down toward base camp. He decided to go there first thing in the morning to investigate. From his vantage point at 5,500 meters, some garments were visible on the ice. Following his intuition, he discovered a blood-stained teammate's coat, a shattered camera, and what appeared to be some of Inaki Areta's possessions. After retrieving them from his RX-6, he continued on his journey. The marks left by the avalanche were clearly visible on the mountain. The ground was still trembling from the impact. Moving in the opposite direction, Banano eventually came upon a spot about 20 meters further down, where he discovered 3 corpses sprawled on a broad, snowy slope. He felt the full emotional weight of the strike. The mental and emotional avalanches looming over him were even more overwhelming than the snow that had fallen. After the questions were answered and the deaths of the 5 mountaineers confirmed, Banano returned to base camp with some photographs. Amidst their grief, the 5 climbers still at base camp felt compelled to inform their loved ones. When the catastrophe first unfolded, the families of the deceased wanted to recover the bodies so they could be closer to them, say their final goodbyes, or bear witness to the tragic reality firsthand. The family members demanded the implementation of all feasible measures. However, Banano and his colleagues were unable to recover the bodies of their companions. Italian climber Sciomeli and a few other neighboring Adorabands remained on the peak. On October 25, 2001, while attempting to retrieve the bodies, another massive avalanche thundered down the slope. Fortunately, no one was injured, but the incident underscored the extreme danger involved in the recovery efforts. The mission was ultimately abandoned due to the high risk of further avalanches. Aero, Cesar, Neto, Ben, Roy, Inaka, and Ja Araus would remain on Pumori forever. On October 27, 2001, the remainder of the squad returned home. The clothing and personal belongings of the lost climbers were given to their families at base camp. A few years later, some of the relatives traveled to Pumori. They saw the landscapes captured in the photos, visited the places where their loved ones had once been beaming, and said their final goodbyes to their children and brothers left on the mountain. No harm came from their visits. Instead, they felt a stronger connection to their lost sons and siblings. They found peace and comfort in knowing exactly where their loved ones had been. Your presence here is tremendously appreciated.